My name is Laura. 6 months ago, I married my high school sweetheart, Matt. We've known each other since childhood, so I've always been close to his family, which made the wedding process incredibly smooth. We share many mutual friends, turning our wedding into a joyous celebration filled with well-wishers. I promised to stand by Matt for the rest of our lives. A few months after we got married, I discovered I was pregnant. I was over the moon, and the blessings kept coming. Matt's mom was incredibly supportive, helping us out almost every day. Since we got married, we've been living with Matt's parents. As an only child, Matt was raised with a lot of love and care, so living with his parents after our wedding felt like the natural choice. I had no qualms about it and agreed immediately. From the day after our wedding, I enjoyed doing household chores with my mother-in-law, and we would chat about all sorts of things. When I announced my pregnancy, she cried tears of joy, celebrating as if it were her own good news. Whenever I tried to do anything around the house, she'd say, "Don't worry, Laura, I've got this," and take over. I'd reassure her, "I'm feeling fine today, really," but she'd insist, "You have to think of the baby first. Rest up," and stop me from doing anything. While I appreciated her concern, it reached a point where I was bored out of my mind. I had been working part-time, but I quit my job as soon as I found out I was pregnant, on the advice of both my mother-in-law and Matt. With nothing to do at home, I was going stir-crazy. I feel like moving around a bit. Can I go shopping? Need anything?" I'd ask, hoping for some freedom. But she'd firmly respond, "Absolutely not. You're not even in your second trimester yet. You need to rest," and wouldn't let me leave the house. I understood her concern, but it felt suffocating. She had a miscarriage before having Matt because she continued working, so she was worried I'd face the same fate. "If you're not careful, you'll end up in the hospital like I did," she warned me. Not wanting to create tension, I decided to take it easy until my second trimester. Once I reached that milestone, she started allowing me short walks. Matt and I would go out on his days off, buying snacks from a local store and having little picnics. Sometimes I'd go for a walk with my mother-in-law while shopping. She even started cooking with me again. I realized she was just deeply concerned for me during the early stages of my pregnancy. At 38 weeks, my water broke while I was climbing the stairs at home. With Matt and my father-in-law at work, my mother-in-law quickly drove me to the hospital. Matt had already coordinated everything with the hospital, so by the time our baby Brian was born, he was right there with us. Matt was the first to hold Brian. "Oh, he's so adorable," he said, his eyes welling up with tears as he lovingly gazed at our newborn. Seeing him so emotional made me tear up too. "Thank you, Laura. I'm so happy right now," Matt said, smiling at me, and I couldn't help but cry. "May I come in?" My mother-in-law, who had kindly stepped out of the room, peeked her head in. "Go ahead and hold him, Mom. He's really cute," Matt said, handing Brian over to her. I felt a bit awkward. My mother-in-law had been incredibly supportive and was eagerly awaiting her grandchild. What would she say now that Brian was here? The thought made me anxious. "Thanks to you, we were able to have Brian safely. Thank you so much," I said to her, grateful for all her support. But her response was unexpected. "He doesn't look like him." "What?" I asked, unsure if I heard her correctly. "What do you mean? He doesn't look like Matt. Are you sure he's Matt's child?" What was she talking about? This should have been a happy moment, but my heart started racing uncontrollably. "What are you saying?" Matt immediately confronted her, but she continued without apologizing. "Look at Matt's baby pictures. Brian doesn't resemble him at all," she said, showing us a baby picture of Matt on her phone. "Well, they don't have to look exactly alike," I started to say, but before I could finish, she stormed out of the room, exclaiming, "I can't deal with a child whose parentage is in question." "Hey, Mom," Matt said, following her out and leaving me alone. I looked at Brian's face and started to cry. He looked so much like Matt, especially around the eyes and ears. Matt never returned to the room and only texted me to say he was going home with his mom. I was stunned by his behavior but too exhausted to confront him. A few days later, on the day of my discharge, Matt came to pick me up but seemed distant. "What's wrong? We get to live together starting today," I said, trying to lift the mood, but he didn't seem happy. "Mom's still upset. Try not to provoke her," he said. I had just given birth and was mentally and physically drained. Why did I have to be considerate of her on the day I was discharged? I didn't say anything and the ride home was silent. The tension didn't ease even after we got home. As soon as I walked in, my mother-in-law greeted me with sarcasm, saying, "Oh, you're back. My father-in-law avoided eye contact, and my mother-in-law continued with snide remarks. I've told you many times, this child is Matt's. His name is Brian. Won't you please love him? I pleaded, but she ignored me completely. Say something, Matt, I cried out, but he responded coldly, it's true. He doesn't look like me. At that moment, my tears dried up. Matt, who should have supported me, had abandoned me. Looking back, I wish Matt had stood up to his mother. But instead, he sided with her. I felt hollow and resigned myself to the idea that my mother-in-law might never love Brian. Matt wasn't helping with childcare either, which only added to my stress. Can you feed him formula while I take a shower? I asked. Matt replied, I've been working all day. Why should I lose sleep over a child who might not even be mine? I couldn't believe this was happening. Never mind, I said, feeding Brian the formula myself and quickly taking a shower once he fell asleep. This had become my life. If it had only been my mother-in-law, I might have considered getting a DNA test to prove her wrong. But even Matt wasn't convinced Brian was his. That hurt more than anything. My parents had moved to the countryside soon after I got married, so I couldn't rely on them for support. They had been thrilled about my marriage and had welcomed Matt as if he were their own child, which made it impossible for me to confide in them. After months of this, my mother-in-law, who had been avoiding me, finally spoke up. Laura, can you bring the baby to the living room? All right, I replied. My mother-in-law had been ignoring both me and Brian, and I thought she might finally apologize. But my expectations were quickly dashed when I arrived in the living room and found both her and Matt sitting there. Could you please leave with that child? She demanded. What? I was stunned and at a loss for words. She glanced at Brian and continued, he still doesn't look like him. I've had enough. Matt remained silent. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll pack my things and leave, I said, grabbing the divorce papers and starting to pack. Matt said nothing and continued his conversation with his mother. Make sure you pay child support, she said. How can we when we're not even sure he's Matt's? My mother-in-law shot back. I was seething with anger. Without saying another word, I left and went to my parents' house. I explained everything to them, and though they were initially confused, they welcomed me with open arms. I decided to stay with them while I looked for a job and saved some money. I had requested child support from my ex-husband through a lawyer, but the payments never came through. I was determined to cut ties with my ex and his family, so I chose not to press the issue of the unpaid support. Years passed, and Brian was about 6 years old when I received a call from a local friend who also knew Matt, informing me that Matt had died in a car accident. Although I heard about it soon after it happened, I chose not to get involved. Brian was in a busy, active phase, and we didn't attend the funeral. A month later, while catching up with local friends and returning to my hometown for the first time in years, I decided to buy a gift before heading to my friend's house. So Ryan and I went to a department store we used to visit as a family. Laura, I turned around to see my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen in years. I stood there, stunned, as she quickly approached us and said, You're Brian, right? And began talking to him. Brian, I'm your grandma. You really look just like Matt, she said. I couldn't tolerate hearing that. Enough is enough. Because of you. Wait, I started, but she cut me off. Don't be so angry. I've wanted to see you for so long. Feeling my frustration rising, I said, Excuse us, and pulled Brian away, leaving the scene. Was that Grandma? Brian asked. I had kept his grandmother's identity a secret until now, but Brian, now in elementary school, was genuinely curious and kept asking, Is it Grandma supposed to be your mom? Who was that lady? I couldn't avoid it any longer, so I explained it to him in simple terms. When we got home, Brian looked up at me and said, Mama, you've been through a lot, huh? As he patted my head. His kindness made tears well up in my eyes. I felt deeply grateful for having him in my life. A month later, my mother-in-law showed up at the apartment where Brian and I were living. How did you find us? I asked, surprised. She replied, I asked around through Matt and our mutual friends. I finally tracked you down and pushed her way inside. Please leave, I said firmly. She responded, Matt died in an accident, and my husband passed away from illness. You two are all the family I have left. Brian came out of the next room, likely drawn by my mother-in-law's loud voice. Spotting him, she said, Brian, why don't you come live with Grandma? I have a bigger house and can give you lots of delicious food. Stop it, I said as my mother-in-law pulled out a thick envelope. It contains $50,000 for child support. You two are all the family I have left, so please come live with me, she said, pushing the envelope toward me. Then she turned to Brian with a smile and said, Brian, Grandma wants you to come live with her. I'll buy you anything you want, okay? In that moment, I felt overwhelmed and on the verge of tears. I was torn between questioning why now and wondering if I should deny Brian the chance to have another grandmother. I was at a loss for words. Then Brian spoke up. I'm not going. My mother-in-law let out a confused sound at Brian's words. Brian, what are you saying? You can live with Grandma. There'll be lots of delicious food, and I'll buy you toys, she said, trying desperately to persuade him. I don't want to. You were mean to Mama, right? My only grandma is Mommy's mom, Brian said, pulling away from her and sitting down beside me. My mother-in-law fell silent, her expression reflecting a sense of defeat. After staring at us for a moment, she abruptly stood up and left the house without another word. We haven't heard from her since that day, and she never visited us again. The child support money she left behind remains untouched, saved for Brian's future. When I consulted my parents about whether to return the money, they said, you never received child support before, so it's fine to keep it. Taking their advice, I decided to keep it. I hadn't heard anything about my mother-in-law since then, but honestly, it no longer matters to me. I have Brian, who is so strong and steadfast by my side. Even at his young age, Brian protected me from his grandmother's advances and chose me over her tempting offers. I love him with all my heart and am committed to raising him responsibly. I want to ensure his happiness, even without a father, now and forever.